we will come to and we will get to spend some time on. And in that story, Khizr keeps doing all these surprising, troublesome, confusing, and perplexing things. And Moses keeps objecting until at the end, Khizr reveals the secret. In the Central Asian tradition of Sufism, the Naqshbandi tradition of the line of the Khajigan, there is a beautiful teaching that says every person that you encounter, every person, treat them as if they might be Khizr. Not that they are necessarily, right? Every once in a while, you might see somebody who's really oppressing someone. They're doing that thing that in the Quran is the worst thing that any person could do, which is to steal the property of orphans, right? If you are tired of waiting in line in the day of judgment, you do not want to stop, go, you do not want to collect 200, you want to go straight into that most tropical place, well, go and steal the property of orphans. So if you see somebody doing that, and hurting people and oppressing people, all right, so maybe that person, not necessarily Khizr, but otherwise, think the lovely of one another. And this is when we're trying to have a sense of fellowship, a sense of community, it's a beautiful practice to think well of one another, and to think well of what might be in our cup of chai, to think well of what has brought us here and what might keep us coming back. That's right. Yeah, a beautiful saying from a new friend, Joseph, what is not love is a cry out for love. And so often we do see notions where without excusing it, without apologizing for it, hurt people hurt people. It's the people that have some sense of wound in their own heart that lash out towards others. So I had mentioned that this week we are coming upon the celebration for the birthday of the Blessed Prophet Muhammad, known as the Mawlid, the Milad, or the Mevlut in different parts of the world. And in many places, this is a festive occasion. The streets might be decorated with lanterns, sweets might be passed around. People visit friends and family. Some of these monthly gatherings that we have, we are going to be devoting them to specific themes. And so for this occasion, I wanted to have an opportunity for us to take a look at the theme of the prophets. And in particular, the Prophet Muhammad. Remember that one of the fundamental teachings of this path is that there is one God, one absolute reality, one humanity, and one light, one guidance, one teaching that shines through all the prophets and all the sages in their own language, in their own symbols, in their own method of teaching. But there is also a shared light. And one of the names that has been given to this shared light is Nur Muhammad, the Muhammadan light, the Muhammadan light. So in that sense, sometimes people use the analogy of a rosary, or if it's long enough to wear as a necklace, um, the analogy of a necklace, and how you would add bead after bead after bead to the necklace or to the rosary. And the first one that you put in might be the last one to get tied up. And so they use this analogy that the light of Muhammad, which equally beautifully shines in all the prophets and all the sages. So to have a person who thinks well, there's that practice of husn zan again, thinks well of the prophets, thinks well of the sages. We honor them, we revere them, even if at times we might come across a teaching where what they're saying and what they're teaching doesn't really hold appeal to you at that moment. And many of us have encountered this. We've come across teachings, perhaps in scripture or elsewhere, where you hold it up and you're like, to use our favorite metaphor, not my cup of tea. I'll sign up for virtual chai, but this ain't my cup of tea. Okay, when we come across that, hold it, observe it, gently put it down, and go to the places that quench your thirst. Sometimes we may find that later on in life, our perspective has shifted, has changed. We've accumulated some lived experiences. We might re-encounter some of those teachings, and you might still say, still not my cup of tea. Or you might say, I never thought about it in quite that way. Okay. So there's a way in which this birthday of the Prophet Muhammad, this festive celebration, becomes an occasion to honor the that one light that shines forth from the source of all light, which is God. What I want to do very often in these gatherings, in these sessions, we're going to begin with a little bit of music, because music is inherently something that is subtle. In the old days, the Greeks and later on their Muslim heirs held that music is not banging on a drum or the plucking of a string, that music is actually the sound of the movement of the heavens. And if something here on earth is pleasing to us, it's because it serves as a kind of echo, as a kind of reminder of a celestial, subtle experience that we've had in that other realm, in that more luminous realm. So I think with your permission, we will start. And in different times, in different weeks, we might listen to different samples of music. Sometimes it might be instrumental. Sometimes it might be have some verbal content. Can you all see this, the black screen with the words Miraj appearing? All right. So this is an example of Qawwali music from South Asia. Qawwali means to say something over and over again emphatically. It's a tradition that started out in what is today Iran and Turkey, but really flourished much more so in South Asia. You all hear the sound?
در صورت हस्त मौजूद तुई हायात कमाल अयानस बतो आजाद के दर परदा नबूद तुई सुहानी रात थी सुहानी रात थी और पुरसकूं जमाना था असर में डूबा हुआ जज्ब आशिकाना था उन्हें तो अर्श पे महबूब को बुलाना था हवस थी दीद की मेराज का बहाना था सरला मका से तलब हुई सरला मका से तलब हुई सुए मुंतहा वो चले नबी सरला मका से तलब हुई सुए मुंतहा वो चले नबी सरला मका से सरला मका से तलब हुई सुए मुंतहा वो चले नबी ये कमाल हुस्न का मौजज़ा ये फिराक हक भी न सह सका सरला मका से तलब हुई सुए मुंतहा वो चले नबी शब मेराज लिया अर्श बरी पर बुलवाए शब मेराज लिया अर्श बरी पर बुलवाए सदमाए हिजर खुदा से भी गवाए.
So we're going to come back to that in just a second. So what's being sung about here is, of course, it's none other than the account of the Prophet Muhammad's heavenly ascension. This is the archetypal example of the mystical quest. It's to rise and to see the face of God directly without any limitations or barriers. It's an account that is talked about in the Quran, and different friends have had different ways of seeing it. Some theologians who, they're like, okay, that's close enough. You can stay right there. They tend to talk about this as perhaps Muhammad saw the angel Gabriel. But for the Sufis, it's much more clear. They really see this as the example of the ascension of the human being to behold and witness God as we beheld God in that time before time, in that place before place. And for them, and for us, this is the whole goal of existence. You want to see the face of God. So many people talk about behaving in a way that is Christ-like. Some people talk about the model of following the example of the Prophet Muhammad, the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. But for friends on this path, the most important, most powerful way of behaving like Muhammad is to go where he went. He rises to see God face to face. And if you want to aspire to be part of a prophetic community, then we aspire to rise and ascend and have our own vision. Many of the mystics, many of the Sufis describe their own visionary experiences as well, that we'll talk about it. But let's come back and apologize if the sound is a little faint. I may try switching it here, seeing if that will help us a little bit.
हिजर खुदा से भी गवारा न हुआ, ना हुआ सरला मकां से तलब हुई, सुए मुंतहा वो चले नबी।
And then what you're going to get in this part is a repetition of certain phrases from the Quran and the tradition. I'm going to let you watch this. So let's come back and talk about what it is that we're sort of hearing here. Remember, there's the language of theology, and then there's the language of love, the language of poetry, right? We shouldn't confuse these two. Lovers talk to each other a certain way that is perhaps a little different than the way that some theologians may talk. So one of the lines that you have in here is that God himself couldn't bear to be away from Muhammad. And the whole ascension was just a bahane. It was an excuse. It was a pretext, right? I'm sitting in the room, you're in the other room, and I'm like, oh, my beloved, would you bring me a glass of water? And you bring the glass over, and then I would say, the water was just a bahane. I wanted to see your face. Right? Now, theologians would at this point have had a conniption. And they're like, what kind of a God is it that needs to be, and because isn't God already with you, right? But the language of love, the language of poetry is something different. Here's one of the meanings that our friends have given to this teaching. Any of us that follow along on a spiritual journey, sometimes we start by thinking that we set out on a path, that we have made a certain intention, that we have followed along with a certain discipline. We've made some changes in our life to imbue it with a sense of beauty and love and mercy. Perhaps we have given up certain practices that we feel like pulled us away from that beautiful person that we're trying to become. And surely any real spiritual path worth its salt has to call for some measure of transformation. It has to call for certain habits that are more beautiful, more tender, more loving, more just. But when you read this path a little bit more, you find that there are sages like Bayezid Bistami, that great early saint, who says, I spent 30 years of my life setting out on this spiritual journey, searching for God. And after 30 years, I found out that the one that I was seeking was actually the one who was seeking me. Right? And he has this very dramatic conversation with the divine, in which he says, oh, my Lord, I've been searching for you for 30 years. And then God softly answers back to him, my friend, I have been seeking you since before there was a thing called time. I've been seeking you since before there was a thing called time. And so the one who is the lover becomes the beloved. The ones who are seeking become sought after. There are many different beautiful accounts of the Mi'raj, of the heavenly ascension in our tradition. And one of the most amazing ones is a simple one-line expression about the moment in which this shift from being the lover to being the beloved takes place. And this is in one of the moments of the Mi'raj, of the ascension, in which God says to the Prophet Muhammad, representing that spirit of guidance, that prophetic light, God says to the Prophet, up until now, I have spoken and you have listened. I've revealed the revelation and you've taken it into your heart. Let's switch roles. Now you speak and I want to listen. The one who was the speaker now becomes the listener and vice versa. On our spiritual journey, this is also part of what we have to experience. There's times in which we are called to act on the world, to go forth, to change things, to transform things. And then there's times that call for a measure of receptivity, of receiving what God is whispering in our hearts. And just as every bird has two wings, and in order for it to soar, it needs to be able to balance these wings, we too have to learn to balance these qualities. Like Muhammad in his ascension, of being receptive towards God and active in the world. Receiving, processing, internalizing, and sharing. If we only see our task as being passive before God, well, then we become a kind of recluse, a hermit that is of little benefit to anyone. But if we only try to fly with that other wing of making this world a better place, changing the world, changing people, not usually ourselves, changing other people, because I'm great as I am. That's the voice of the ego. If we give up that measure of receptivity, of being like the earth that receives the rain of God, the rain that pours down like Rahman, the all-merciful, well, then our change and transformation is likely to fizzle out. We have to do both. Be involved in the world, work on creating an earth that is an echo of heaven, and to be receptive towards the divine. I want to come back here and let's see, how do we? Oh, I think I know what I did. I want to now move on to a couple of other images to share with you. There we go. Those of you who speak perhaps Urdu or Persian, many of these have strong Arabic words. So, you would recognize that one of the lines that they were repeating in this beautiful qawwali is a very well-known line of poetry, Kashafa duja bijamalihi. that he unveiled the darkness through his beauty. Now, if you happened to have studied a lot of the literature of these poets and these saints, you would know that this comes from the great poet Sadi, the wonderful author of the Gulistan, the Rose Garden. So think about what a beautiful cosmopolitan world this was. You have a Persian poet from the city of Shiraz who writes a line in Arabic, Persian poet writing in Arabic about the Arabian prophet Muhammad. بَلَغَ الْعُلَى بِكَمَالِهِ. He reaches the heights through his perfection. He pierces the darkness through his beauty. And that same calligraphy is, if you ever go to the Sultan Ahmed Mosque in Istanbul, the so-called Blue Mosque in Istanbul is inscribed there very prominently. So in one of the most popular of the Turkish mosques in Istanbul, the Turks are displaying the words of a Persian poet written in Arabic, and then the same Arabic line written by a Persian poet displayed in Turkey are now being sung in South Asia by an Urdu-speaking Qawwal. These are times where the attraction to beauty is what pulls us far beyond the lines of ethnicity and language. This is the way that traditionally the ascension of the Prophet Muhammad is remembered in certain drawings. And in thinking about one of the relevances, applications that it has for us is the way that the story is often told is that Muhammad ascends through heaven until he comes to a point where usually it's said the angel Gabriel has been accompanying him, and he lowers the prophet to the ground and he says, I can't go any further. The prophet says, oh friend, you've been my companion. You brought me here from Mecca. We went to Jerusalem. We met all the great prophets. We met Noah. We met Ibrahim. We met Jesus and Moses. Why are you stopping here? And Gabriel says, well, because you see, from this point on, the intensity of God's love is so strong that if I just take a step as wide as the width of one of my feathers, all of me would burn up. But you, Muhammad, Gabriel says, you are love. You are mercy. You are rahmatun lil alameen, and love can enter into love. Mercy can enter into mercy. So you go ahead. And Muhammad, in fact, enters that direct divine presence. When someone like Maulana Rumi gets a hold of his story, of this story and this experience, he says, aha, there's a lesson in this for us. And the lesson is, in order for Muhammad to ascend to God's presence, you need to have Gabriel. Gabriel always symbolizes, like the angels, the aql, the intellect. You need to have your intellect, right? Your God-given faculty of contemplation and reflection. It's not a dirty thing. It's not some satanic device, as some might have said, to mislead you. It's a gift from God. And you have to balance that gift of intellect with the gift of what Muhammad represents, which is love, which is mercy. You might be able to think your way to heaven, which is not a bad place to be, I'm told. But if the goal is to enter into the divine, you have to learn to balance the rational side, the intellectual side, with the spiritual side. So it's probably a good contemplation for us, for each one of us, to sit and reflect and think about what are the parts of my being that maybe are stronger in that intellectual area, and then which are the areas that are more perhaps spiritually oriented. Sometimes you would see friends who would depict the divine names, the Asma al-Husna, in this fantastic way, and then they would have a corresponding measure for Asma al-Nabi, the names of God and the names of the Prophet, as two roses resembling one another. God never stays abstract. God never stays distant. In a real sense, the purpose of the prophets and the saints is to be a mirror, or if you prefer a different metaphor, a glass through which the light of God can shine. And I want to end just this little conversation with a reminder. One of the sayings and statements of the Prophet is this statement that you see written in beautiful calligraphy here. Innama, or inni, bu'ithtu li'utammim makarim al-akhlaq. Indeed, I was sent, I was resurrected to bring nobility to manners. I was sent to bring a sense of honor, dignity, beauty, and nobility to your ethics. We hear a lot of times people talking about, I'm spiritual but not religious. You hear people talk about, could an atheist be a moral person, a good person? Of course they can. They can feed the poor. They can practice kindness and virtue. We want to also think about the situation in a complementary way. Think about how often have any of us met people who might meet the checklist of being quote unquote religious. They might fast and pray and do all the things that the religion asks of them. But are they kind? Are they gentle? Are they, in fact, beautiful? Or is their religiosity somehow holier than thou, judgmental, where they seem in a rush to send everybody else on a one-way ticket to that most tropical of locations? When you see the statement, إِنِّي بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمْ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, I was sent to bring nobility and dignity to manners. Now, those of you who are familiar with the Quran, you would remember this, that within the language of the Quran, the Prophet, and by extension, each one of us, is assured that you are created in a khulqun adim, in an exalted nature. Exalted nature. You've been created for a majestic destiny, to be a friend of God. And so this notion, this teaching that the Prophet has been sent to bring nobility to manners is tied to that notion of who and what you are. So this isn't a kind of mismanners, misetiquette guidebook of telling us in this situation, behave this way and consult the rule book if you're not sure how to behave. It's about a transformation of the heart. When your heart becomes beautiful, then whatever is in the heart spills over. Your glance becomes beautiful. Your touch becomes beautiful. Your words may become beautiful. In many ways, this is actually the opposite of the way that so much of the modern world tends to operate. We try to change our appearance, or even worse, our social media, and think that in times that leads to a transformation of the heart. But the prophetic way is actually to reverse that. You sit with people and you work on gently healing each other's hearts, transforming the hearts, including your own, until there is resurrected in your heart that which brings a measure of nobility and dignity. This is, in fact, and I'm really going to stop here, the paradox of walking a prophetic path, being part of a prophetic community, no matter whether that prophet is the Buddha, Moses, Christ, Muhammad, or any of the other women and men known and unknown. We cannot get to God without the grace and the teaching and the example of these guides. It would be like wandering around in a desert, lost, and trying to make it to the next settlement without knowing how to look for water. And at the same time, as I told a friend one time, we cannot ascend to God on the wings of our ancestors, but we cannot ascend to God without the wings of our ancestors. It's a both and, yes to all the above. The very model of the spiritual life in our tradition is a model of ascension, following in the footsteps of the prophet. And as Rumi's beloved Shams once said, why are you walking with someone else's walking stick? You have to learn to stand up on your own 2 feet and to journey on the path yourself. It's not enough. It's beautiful, it's tempting, but it's not enough to say, this is how the prophet went, and this is how that friend of God went, and this is how Imam al-Ghazali went, and such and such. We ourselves have been given wings to soar. We can't do it without their help, but it also takes our own initiative and drive. And alhamdulillah, we're not left alone. So here's the part that I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath. You are bold and courageous people. You can do this. I have faith in us. Because we're now going to take a deep breath and take about 7 minutes to go into some breakout groups. And then we're going to come back and do a very simple Sufi breathing exercise, a breathing dhikr. So if you disappear on me because you think breakout rooms are the devil's creation, you will not receive the Sufi breathing practice. You can do this. I know you can. I have faith in you. I have faith in us. So let's see how we're going to do this. And as I mentioned the last time that we tried this, and most people said, oh, it was really good. We wish we could have stayed longer. We're going to go into the breakout rooms. I want you to introduce yourself, maybe talk about something from the teachings, either from today or from the previous times, or maybe one of the courses, if you've signed up for those, that has meant something to you. The one thing that is not allowed at all is for us to judge other people's observations or act as their life coach. We're not each other's life coaches. We are friends accompanying each other on the path. So when someone shares their observation, their experience, our response is going to be, thank you. And if you notice that somebody just can't really help themselves as being the group therapist, thank you. Next person, right? So we're going to go there and then we're going to come back and then we'll do the concluding breathing practice. Bismillah. Feel free to join the rooms that you've been invited to. Rose, it's really wonderful to see you.
It is my delight to see you, of course.
I've missed you, and I've missed our journeys together.
Yes, yes, but I look forward to the possibilities of other trips.
May it be,
May
inshallah.
it be.
May it be. So, got about 10 seconds or so till our friends join us. Okay. All right.
Ustad, next time you're gonna ask for more time.
You know, this is the opposite of the Persian way. As opposed to overloading people's plates, you start by just giving them a little bit and a little bit and a little bit until, you know, they ask for more. And then, you know, it's very happy to offer more. So how was it? How was it to be in a communion and conversation with one another?
Great, not enough time, like she said.
And I got to meet such a wonderful group of people, beautiful spirits. So
Alhamdulillah. Yeah, it's you know, beauty attracts beauty, and it's a joy to see friends drawn to one another. So, you know, I think inshallah, after some time and prayer and reflection, this is kind of the model that we're going to pursue for these monthly gatherings. We'll start by having you grab your cup of chai. We'll play some piece of sacred music that might have a connection to the theme of what we're discussing. I'll share a little bit of what some friends would call a sohbat, a teaching that comes out of a tradition, maybe sitting with some lines of poetry or an example, a story from some of the friends of God or the life of the prophets. And then we'll spend some time getting to know each other a little bit. And then we'll end with a dhikr, or a practice that sometimes has a breath element, sometimes has a chanting element. And I've invited a lot of feedback from friends, and the things are never unanimous, but the consensus pretty clearly seems to be that people would love for these monthly gatherings to be freestanding, regardless of whether or not somebody is doing a course at a specific time. Sometimes in life, people have time for a course, sometimes they don't. And sometimes, just like today, I think I see a couple of friends, Joseph and Nasra and some others who, you know, this might have been the first time that they have a chance to join us. And so we want that to be open to friends. And what I always tell people is, you know, sometimes people ask me, oh, who is this for? And what I oftentimes mention to them is that, ideally speaking, they are meant for two groups of people. One of them is people who are spiritually seeking and thirsty, of whatever faith background, as long as they are open to the discipline that this particular spiritual path involves. Right? And that word discipline is probably as unsexy as I can make it, on purpose. There is a certain rigor that is involved in the Sufi path. So, you know, this is not a place for argumentation. Thank God there's no shortage of places that we can all go and rip each other a new one. I think that's what the cool kids call it. And but this is not it. And then the other place is we have many, many friends who come from a Muslim background, who are thirsting for what in our tradition we call the water of life. But they're looking for an aspect of Islam that is bathed in nur, in light, in mercy, in rahmah. So as a very dear friend of mine says, you know, we are unapologetically Muslim. And like any tree that offers fruit, it is rooted and grounded in this tradition, but its branches spread far and wide, and it should be able to offer fruit to anyone who comes in contact with it. So those are the two communities or groups with obviously overlaps among them, that if you think of someone, feel free to share it. I'll send out an email with a little bit more guidelines and things, because we are going to try to have this be a freestanding conversation. But let's now do the fun part, which is a very simple spiritual practice. Can I just, for a show of hands, just see how many of you can raise your physical hands? We still have those. It's not all about the virtual hand on Zoom. How many of you were here last month with us when we started the practice part? Okay, so some, but not many. All right. So this is a form of dhikr, the remembrance of God, that is very commonly done in the Persian and South Asian tradition. It has roots in the Chishti tradition of South Asia, but also the forms of Sufism that were very common in that region from Iran to Afghanistan to Central Asia. And there's other regions of the world that have their own forms of the zikr as well. And so this is one that begins with awareness of the breath. Awareness of the breath. So in that particular tradition, we're told that the spiritual path consists of not just repeating these three phrases, but realizing them, actualizing them, practicing them. Hosh bardam, to practice awareness of the breath. Nazar bar qadam, to keep your eyes, your glance focused on your own path. Khalvat dar anjuman, and to remain in solitude with the one while in the company of creation. So awareness of the breath, keeping your eyes focused on the path, and to strive for that balance of maintaining your sense of being alone with the one while in the company of the many. Because after all, the many, every person that you're in touch with, might be Khizr. They might be a friend of God, and they're surely a manifestation of the divine. So if it's easier, sometimes people in group settings, even if we were all in the same room, I would still ask us to close our eyes. Maulana Rumi oftentimes says, close the eyes of the head and open up the eyes of the heart. Close the ears of the head and open up that inner faculty. And I'll do the same thing. And I'm so nearsighted that I'm going to take off my glasses. So I couldn't even see you if I wanted to now with the eyes of the head. And we're going to begin Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim by simply observing the breath that we are taking in and to trace that breath. Observe the breath as it comes in, expands your chest, and then we release it back for 5 or 6 cycles, very slow, deep breaths. And take your hand, whichever is the hand that you use more often, and place it on your chest, close to your heart somewhere. Now when you're breathing, fill your chest, fill your lungs with air, and notice how you breathe and then you breathe again. Then don't hold on to that breath. After your chest has risen, release it back again. You can keep your hand on your chest if that helps. Lower your hand. You might notice that your breaths have gotten deeper, that in much of our ordinary life, we're taking shallow breaths. Breaths that just come down to the top part of your chest. As you observe the breath, it slows down. Take deeper breaths, more satisfying, more life-giving. Now, for these next 5 to 10 breaths, when you invite the breath to fill you, to rejuvenate you, listen for the sound of the beating of your heart. It's there. It's the reason you're alive, but we've forgotten about it. So take these deep breaths and hold it for just a second to see if you can hear the beating of your heart and release the breath. Just going to continue with that breath. But as you become aware of that pulsation of the heart, that beating of the heart, you might notice as you pay attention to the breath and the pulsing of the heart, that it's not just beating in the left side of your chest, but that you can detect it in your whole chest. And in fact, maybe even through your body. You might feel that pulsation in the tips of your fingers or your toes. So let's take some time. Observe the breath and see if you can detect that pulsation through your body. Remember that in the Quran, we are told that God is closer to you than that pulsation. God is closer to you than the beating of your heart. Now, the human being is a creature of dust and spirit, and all of you is sacred, all of you is noble, all of you is beautiful. The dust, the earth, the clay that forms your body came from faraway stars. You are stars that came scattering out of nowhere. The earth mingles with the breath. So the first breath that we'll practice is the earth breath. The earth breath. Inshallah, in time, we will also practice the water breath, the fire breath, the air breath. But we begin with where our feet are planted, the earth breath. And to do this, we're going to take in a deep breath through the nose, feel that pulsation, and breathe back out through the nose. Imagine your breath as you're releasing it, almost like an old oriental carpet that you're rolling out. Trace your breath through your nose, through the room, to the walls of the house that you're in, over the meadows and the grass, over the trees, out to the horizon. And then breathe it back. Let's do that around 10 times. This is the earth breath. And in conclusion, take in a deep breath, the earth breath, through your nose. As you're doing it, breathe in the word, the phrase, the sound, al. Then with your nose, breathe out, lah, into the heart. So breathe in al, and then breathe into the heart, lah. Together, Allah, the God, the one, the only. The breath is fine. It is subtle. It is the breath that God breathed into you at the moment of creation. You are participating in that divine breath. When you remember Allah, you are with the one who first breathed in you. So we're going to just practice that about 10 times, very gently and softly. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. When you breathe out the air breath and the water breath and the fire breath and the earth breath, you are reminded that you are connected to the elements, to nature, to the earth, to plants, to animals, to fellow human beings, to angels, the prophets, and God. As your breath rolls across the plains, as you breathe across the trees and the bushes, the breath that was just coming out of your lungs washes over leaves, over rose bushes, and over plants. The oxygen that they release visits you in your heart. We are sympathetic with one another. We breathe the same air. You're not alone. You've never been alone. Your very life mingles with all the living creatures and even what we might perceive as inanimate. But they too have a soul and they too have a life. Inshallah, in the sessions to come, we'll talk a little bit more about these teachings of the breath when they are at the level of soul or spirit or air, which are all the same word, nafas or nefesh in Hebrew, and when they have a zikr or a word attached to them. Maybe next session, we'll talk about the way that the Blessed Prophet talked about nafasur Rahman, the breath of the all-compassionate. Nafasur Rahman as a reminder of God's manifestation all around. But for someone who's married to a beautiful Swiss beloved, I am doing a terrible job of keeping time. So I'm about to lose my time credential as the beloved of a Swiss wife by having kept us 19 minutes too long. Ask for your forgiveness, and I'll try to be more punctual next time. We're still working on the balance of these sessions. Thank you, friends, for joining us. Thank you for your company. I invite you and encourage you during the course of the next few weeks until we meet again, inshallah. And in all likelihood, the next session would probably be November 20th and then December 18th. November 20th and December 18th, in all likelihood. We're aiming for the third Saturday of each month. Until we meet again, here's one thing I would invite you to do. Return to the earth breath as often as you can. If you find yourself just getting a little anxious, a little out of sorts, right? Just pause long enough to observe the breath coming into your heart and going back out. Trace it across the trees and the bushes. People might get weirded out if you're staring out into space and they're like, what are you doing? Oh, just, the earth breath. Feeling my unity with plants and trees and flowers, and knowing that I'm not alone in reliving the breath of the all-compassion. Or you can just keep that to yourself, as the case might be. It's an extraordinary gift from this tradition to remember who you are. And as we say, to remember whose you are. You're not alone. Your very existence is because God breathed into you this life-giving breath. And the minute that you return to noticing it, to having hosh dardam, awareness mingling with your breath, then once again, you're already on your way to ascending, to standing before God face to face. So be well, my dear and beloved friends. Thank you for the gift of your time. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your trust. And do send some feedbacks about ways that we can make this hour or so once a month most worthy of you. I will try to send out in a couple of weeks the link and arrangements and things for the gathering next month. Feel free to share that with your friends as well. And be well, be blessed, and may your lives be filled with heavenly joy. Bye, friends.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hugs to everybody.
Thank you so much.
Ah.
Also wanted to say thank you, Doc. First time here, alhamdulillah. This is Jamel.
Jamal, lovely to see you. I owe you an email, but thank you so much for being with us, my friend.
This is the grounding, man. I look forward to more of this. So alhamdulillah, we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, Mr.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Tanjan. Thank you for your painting, which we hope to get to next time.
Inshallah, I will be ready, inshallah, to say a few words. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.